as well. Want me to get you two, Kevin?
So in terms of right now how things shake out in your Heisman candidate, where do you see Will Grier fitting into that picture?
I have him firmly in that upper echelon of guys. See, I think that it kind of falls in like legitimate chance, and then your kind of your middle tier guys, and then dark horse candidates. He's a guy with a legitimate chance. He would be in my top 4 or 5. I think probably more like top 4. I think Trace McSorley from Penn State has a legitimate chance. I think that the quarterback at Ohio State, Dwayne Haskins, has got a legitimate chance. I think Bryce Love, the running back at Stanford, he's someone that could make some noise. Will Grier, just to name a few. So I also believe in stages early and late. You have to build momentum, keep it, and then really finish to win a Heisman Trophy. In particular, at a school that maybe doesn't have the pedigree, that Ohio State has, right? So the first thing that he's got to do is he's got to play well and the team win against Tennessee and North Carolina State. Those 2 stages are really good for his candidacy. And then late, he's got all the big boys in the Big 12 late. He goes to Texas. He hosts Oklahoma in the last week of the season. All of those point to the fact that if he can stay healthy, if they can be as potent as I believe they can be on offense, there's a good chance that he's going to have the numbers and have the momentum to get a really legitimate look from all of us who are Heisman voters.
And he's got some weapons this year, David Sills, Gary Jennings, also some running backs as well. How important are those performances going to be from those guys to be able to keep Will in that national conversation?
Yeah. One goes with the other, right? I'm very similar to, and I think Dana would even admit to this, I think that they resemble last year's Oklahoma State team. Really good at quarterback, really good at wide receiver, good at running back. They've got, and all of those guys will have to contribute. You can't just have one guy out there, carrying the mail. The numbers just won't add up. So to have multiple weapons on the outside, to be able to do all the different things that they do offensively, I think he's got a great shot. Well, let's just put it this way. I expect him, if someone was to tell or to ask me, you have to bet $1,000 in Vegas on one of the Big 12 teams reaching 8-0. Any team. I would put my $1,000 on West Virginia. Their schedule lends itself to that. So what does that mean? Well, that means that there is a chance, whether it's small or likely, whatever it is, that West Virginia is in the top 5 in the country, 8-0, going to Austin, Texas for a November 3rd or 2nd game against the Longhorns. There's a good chance Will Grier's leading the Heisman Trophy race at that point, if that's true. So you ask about all the other weapons, I divulge into the schedule. I'm just telling you that all of those things are going to work into his favor. All those players are going to have a big year for him to reach those goals.
All 3 of West Virginia's starters last year were up for the Biletnikoff Award. Of course, David Sills was one of the 3 finalists, bringing 2 of the 3 back this year. In terms of a receiving core, how do they match up nationally?
As good as anybody out there. Oklahoma State was such a clear number 1 last year. I mean, their receiving core was ridiculous, and it is still strong this year. But in this conference, I think that the premium wide receiver core is West Virginia. Oklahoma is very good with CeeDee Lamb and Marquise Brown. But there's something about what they do at West Virginia with that offense and the performances that those guys have had together. CeeDee Lamb and Marquise Brown are breaking in a new quarterback. Those really good wide receivers at Oklahoma State, they're breaking in a new quarterback. These guys are back intact, ready to go. So that lends itself to what I think could be a really big statistical year.
And we've been talking to some of the coaches and players about working the tight end in more this season. How beneficial is that going to be as well for what they can do on offense, just adding in that extra piece?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, in that offense, and Oklahoma did it so well last year, and I thought that was maybe the biggest deficiency for Oklahoma State last year, was that they didn't have a real tight end threat. Oklahoma did. Well, what did that mean? Well, Mark Andrews was, quote-unquote, the best tight end in college football last year for Oklahoma. Why? Because he owned the middle of the field on 3rd down. It was like clockwork, man. On 3rd down, when I'm calling an Oklahoma game, I see Baker drop back. His eyes were all over Mark Andrews. The ability to move the chains, to stay on the field, is so important. And it's really hard to do that with outside receivers, because the timing is so critical, the space is so critical, and generally on third downs, everything's quicker, everything's tighter. It's almost like playing in the red zone because you're just trying to achieve a certain yardage rather than, whatever the yardage is to go to the goal line. So that's why the tight end is so important. And if they can get some productivity from that position, I think they're going to be well served.
And defensively, they really haven't been getting the same hype as the offense here for WVU. Did lose some guys with Kaiser, Al-Rashid, but you've got David Long coming back. Yep. He's going to be one of the key players. But defensively, how do you think that West Virginia is going to be on that side of the ball? Back to the unit we saw 2 years ago, or maybe one that's got a little work to do?
Part of it is that they aren't going to be under as much pressure because their offense is going to be so good. I think Tony Gibson is one of the better defensive coaches, certainly in this conference, maybe in college football, for what he's able to do and what he does schematically. When you ask offensive coordinators around the league who the guys are that they're impressed with, his name comes up. He and Todd Orlando, Gary Patterson, those are the names, and so I hope for West Virginia's sake that the defense can play more like last year's defense, even though they lost some pieces. Because if they do, I'm telling you, they've got a shot to be 8-0 going into Texas. And then, let's go flip coins. Let's go. Everyone in West Virginia would take that if I gave it to them right now. Hands down. Like, would you like to be 8-0 going to Texas? Absolutely. There's a chance that happens.
As far as conference, how things shook out in the preseason poll, West Virginia ranked number 2. Yeah. Do you feel that's an appropriate ranking for them? Do you see them maybe at the number 1 spot, lower?
I think number 1 would be hard, and the reason is that philosophically, whoever wins the conference, if it's not Oklahoma, will have to play Oklahoma twice, and the second time they play them, beat them. Here's why that's tough, is because Oklahoma's the most talented team in the conference. So that means in a rematch, you've got to beat a more talented team. That's incredibly difficult to do. Incredibly difficult to do. So that's why I think that it was appropriate, right? I think West Virginia's got a heck of a chance to win the conference, absolutely. I think it helps that they get Oklahoma at home late. We could see a back-to-back rematch. You play them in Morgantown, come to Dallas, play them that next week. So we'll see.
Is that defensive matchup really the difference? Is that the way a West Virginia can catch Oklahoma? Last year, Oklahoma won the league with obviously out-of-this-world offense, but a defense that was not really good.
It's a good question. So last year, Oklahoma State was, and I know they got beat, late. I think it was by Kansas State, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? That sounds right. But they were a play or two away from beating Oklahoma. Baker Mayfield had to set a school record that day, and offensively, it was one of the most amazing games I've seen. I called the game. Basically, what I'm telling you is if West Virginia can go and do that offensively to Oklahoma, you're going to force a team that no longer has Baker Mayfield to try to do what they did against Oklahoma State last year to win the game. I think that's the way to beat Oklahoma this year, is get them into one of those shootouts and say, you don't have the magic man anymore. Can you keep up?
Conversely, you mentioned a little bit about pressure and maybe West Virginia's defense not having to feel it because there's not a lot of expectations. Does that put some on the offense just because there are so many?
Absolutely. All the expectations, all the pressure is on the offense. It is an offensive-led team. The head coach is offensive-minded. They've got the best returning quarterback in the conference. They've got, I think, the best wide receiver core. The pressure is solely on them. They can't underperform, right? They might not be North Carolina State. If the offense is not playing well, then they're not one of the best teams in the conference. So the pressure is on them, certainly. At their full potential, I fully expect them to beat Tennessee. I think they'll beat North Carolina State. And I think they're one of the better teams in the conference, but the pressure is certainly on that offense to play well, and more specifically on Will Grier. I'm talking glowingly about him, but with that comes a lot of pressure. The guy's got to go out there and deliver. Baker did it last year. We sat here last year and was like, well, Oklahoma's going to win the conference if Baker White plays well, played out of this world. So